Okay, so we'll wait a few more minutes.
I'm here.
I don't see, is GIDEON LEVY here?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
he's here. He's here.
Oh,
Yes.
terrific, great. So let me start. Okay. So thank you all for joining. This is the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation simulation. We are simulating a way to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. The formula for peace, as we see it, is the creation of a third government, a common government for the people of Israel and Palestine together, that would exist simultaneously in parallel to the Israeli government and the Palestinian government. It would be a separate and independent government, and it would be created separately by the people of Israel and Palestine. We are here to simulate that. My name is Joseph Havasar. My email is josephhavasar@gmail.com. I would appreciate comments from you after the simulation. This is our website, ipconfederation.org. It's in 3 languages, Arabic, English, and Hebrew. You can go to the website and read the Constitution, and you can also read the Constitution talks about the separate government that would be a secular government with 3 branches, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial, made out of Israelis and Palestinians together on an equal basis. And the Constitution would tell you how the Confederation will be created and how it would function in conjunction with the Israeli and the Palestinian governments. You can also go to the frequently asked questions, which explains in simpler details the Constitution. For those of you who want to participate in the essay competition, go to the homepage and you can enroll. This is the homepage, and you can enroll in the essay competition. We have a $500 Ruth Chapin essay competition. The deadline for that is August 30th. Ruth Chapin just passed away at the age of 90. She was a very strong supporter of the Confederation idea and of the simulation on Zoom. She helped us tremendously. So the title of the essay competition is I Participated in the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Simulation. You can go to the website and understand how to sign up for the competition. We expect the simulation to last 90 minutes, I'm sorry. We will review and ratify the Constitution, and then we will, this time we'll have a little bit of different because we have GIDEON LEVY with us here today. GIDEON LEVY is Haaretz columnist and a member of the newspaper editorial board. He's the author of the weekly Twilight Zone feature, which covers the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza. Mr. Levy was the recipient of the Euromed Journalist Prize for 2008, the Leipzig Freedom Prize in 2001, the Israeli Journalists Union Award in 1997, and the Association of Human Rights in Israel Award for 1996. Just this month, in June, he received the prestigious Sokolov Prize by the city of Tel Aviv. His new book, The Punishment of Gaza, was published by Verso Publishing House in London and New York. Mr. Levy challenges the Israeli political consensus with facts, logic, courage, and dignity. So, Mr. Levy, thank you so much for joining. I just want to ask you if it's okay with you. What we will be doing is we will present segments of how this confederation will work. Each segment will last between 5 to 10 minutes. Then we will ask you to comment on that segment. And then we'll go to the next segment and you'll be asked to comment. We'll try to do about 3 or 4 segments, and then you'll have time to speak to us about in general, and then we'll have questions and answers. Would that be okay with you?
Sure.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so we prepared a short video that explains what the Confederation is all about, and I'd like to play it. It's 2.5 minutes video.
The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians has endured for generations, and instead of time healing the wounds, it's only caused the anger to fester and the violence to grow. But what if there was a way to alleviate the tension? Something that may not outright solve every problem, but at least create a forum that encourages a peaceful compromise. Welcome to the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, a common third government between the Israeli and Palestinian citizens, specifically designed to foster peace, tolerance, and economic prosperity between the two nations. Here's how it works. First off, both Israel and Palestine will keep their respective governments. Israel's Knesset and the Palestinian National Authority will remain unchanged. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation, IPC, will be a third entity, acting as a unifying agent between the two. The IPC will comprise 300 parliament members elected from 300 districts in Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Above them will preside a president and vice president, one Israeli and one Palestinian. In order for the IPC to pass a law, it will require a 55% majority from its Israeli representatives, as well as a 55% majority from its Palestinian representatives, thereby preventing either side from monopolizing the legislature. Of course, the IPC won't undermine the political power of either the Israeli or the Palestinian government. At any time, Israel or Palestine may veto a law passed by the IPC. If neither side vetoes, the law is passed, and the two nations are another step closer to resolution. Please help us make this a reality. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation. We might speak different languages, but we all mean the same thing.
So the simulation objective is to demonstrate how the Israeli-Palestinian conflict could be drastically changed for the better if we have a common government. That it could make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians, but also with its neighbors. We do not have, which is not a historical review today. We're not here to blame either side. This is not anti-Israel or anti-Palestinian event, but it's a pro-peace. And we do not, so that it's clear, we do not preclude any other formulas for peace, but we think that our formula is the best formula. We had disruptions in the past, and we may have them today. Do not be alarmed. We think we know how to deal with them. We are going to be proposing legislation and a constitution. It is written in a demonstration purposes, for demonstration purposes only. It's not written in a legislative language. We are not able to deal with all the legislation. What we'll show you today is really the tip of the iceberg. It's not inclusive. We have a lot more legislation that a common government could pass and wait for it to make peace. We're asking you to look at the big picture and avoid technical arguments. Please suspend reality. Don't start arguing about technical issues. We're also asking that you refrain from comments, but you can ask questions during the simulation. Comments at the end are fine. The difference between a question and a comment, if I show you a picture of an airplane and you say, how does this thing fly? That's a question. But if you say, I will never board a plane because they cause pollution, that's a comment. We're asking that you will use either the chat or the at the end for comments. Questions are okay throughout the simulation. There are certain facts and assumptions that you'll have to consider during the simulation. These are the facts that the Israeli Prime Minister, let me just, okay, so you'll have to, these are facts. The Israeli Prime Minister represents 9 million people. The Palestinian leaders represent 5 million Palestinians. These are facts. You do not have to assume those to be true. However, we are asking you to assume certain assumptions and accept them as facts for the purpose of this simulation. We know they are not facts, but we're asking you to accept them as facts for the purpose of this exercise. That we had an election for the entire area with 14 million people, and 5 million people voted. 3 million Palestinians and 2 million Israelis voted in the election. That the president, that I, Joseph, I became president. I was elected by 1.5 million people. And my vice president, Palestinian, she was elected by 1.3 million. And according to the Constitution, we will rotate after 2 years. We will also, you'll have to assume that 300 parliament members were elected in 300 districts. If you divide 14 million by 300, you'll get 47,000 people. So we are going to ask each one of you to be parliament members and to vote. Does anyone have any questions regarding these facts and assumptions? Okay, I hear no questions. We're going to go to the next. I'm asking, I already asked some of you to be world leaders. So we have a volunteer, Jeff, to be Hamas leader. We have Margot to be the Chancellor of Germany. We have Amnon, who agreed to be the Israeli Palestinian, Amnon, the Israeli Prime Minister, I'm sorry. I need someone to volunteer to be the PA authority president. Do I have a volunteer for that? Is anyone willing to be the?
I can do that.
Okay, is this, I'm sorry,
Nasir.
what's your name?
Nasir.
Nasir, okay, terrific. We need someone to be the president of the United States.
I can do that.
I can.
Okay, we have Chaim, I think he said first.
No, but if she wants to, it's okay.
Okay, so what
I
is
can
your
be
name,
something
the
else.
lady?
My name?
Yeah,
My name is Fatou.
Fatou, okay, president, US president. Okay, the rest of you, I would ask you to choose your nationality, either Palestinian or Israeli. And I'll ask you to change, to put up, either if you are Israeli, put an IS before your name. And if you're Palestinian, put a PA before your name. This way we know who
So
you
now we're
are.
also branding people, you know?
So if you're a Palestinian, change your name, right click under your name and put a PA in front of your name. If you're Israeli, put an IS, right click on your picture. You have your name, you have the ability to rename yourself. So I'm asking you to, now if you cannot do it, we can do it for you. Just tell us your name and what do you want to be?
Hi, Joseph. Sorry to bother you. Can you sign me as Palestinian, please? It's Olivia speaking. Thank you.
Sure. Okay,
Palestinian.
so
Thank
Dan,
you,
could
Joseph.
you designate Olivia as Palestinian? Anybody else? Either you do it yourself or we'll do it for you if you want. But remember, you need to understand that you represent your districts. You do not represent the entire people of Palestine or the entire people of Israel. I am the president. I represent all of the area, Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and Jerusalem. You also have to understand that if you're Israeli or Palestinian parliament member, your district may be mixed. So you'll have to decide in your head, are you a parliament member in Gaza, or are you a parliament member in Tel Aviv, or you're parliament member in Jerusalem or in the West Bank. So you may be representing a mixed district in all these. So as we are changing our names, we are going to read the Constitution. And this is a short version of the Constitution. You'll have to trust me that that this is the shorter version of it, and that it reflects the most important part of the Constitution. We believe that Palestinians and Israelis are entitled to equal rights under the law and guaranteed human rights and freedom. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation does not intend to supersede or supplant the Palestinian or Israeli government, nor to abrogate or undermine any agreements between those governments. We recognize that the government of Israel is the legitimate government of the Israeli people, and the government of Palestine is the legitimate government of the Palestinian people. Our purpose is to resolve conflict and to expand the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis in a fair and equitable manner. We believe in equal rights under the law, guaranteed human rights and freedom for all. We voluntarily give the legislator and the governments of Israel and Palestine veto power over legislation we pass relating to the sovereignty of those nations. That's a very important paragraph. We are saying here that we are legislation that affects the sovereignty, we give the Israeli and the Palestinian government a veto power. We believe in the separation of power between the legislative, executive, and judicial branches. We believe in the creation of a secular government for the people residing in Israel and Palestine. We believe in having separate judicial branch relating to the Israeli-Palestinian legislation with Israeli and Palestinian judges with a system to avoid biased decisions based on nationality. So before I ask Mr. Levy to comment on this, and I'm going to ask you, does anyone have questions? And then we're going to take a vote, and then Mr. Levy will opine on this Constitution. Does anyone have any questions regarding the text in this Constitution?
I have a question.
Yes.
When you say the districts are mixed, it doesn't have to do, well, it does have to do with the Constitution. They're mixed Israeli and Palestinian, like the districts in Israel.
Palestinian?
I'm Palestinian.
Okay, so let's assume you are Palestinian from Jerusalem.
Right.
You could have been elected by Israelis and Palestinians.
So would
But you
there
have to
be,
bear in mind that any question?
I didn't hear the last, I'll have to bear in mind.
Okay, I didn't hear your question. Could you ask it again, please?
Your last comments were cut off. You had a connection issue. So the last few words we didn't hear.
Okay,
Thank
let
you.
me just repeat. If you are a Palestinian parliament member,
Mhm,
let's assume you are from Jerusalem.
mhm.
Your constituents could be Israelis and could be Palestinians. And you'll have to bear that in mind when you vote. You're representing a district that is a mixed district.
So all the
Any other
Israeli
questions?
districts, most of the Israeli districts will be mixed districts.
No, you will have to decide. If you are a Israeli from Tel Aviv, in all likelihood, your district is exclusively Israeli. If you are a Palestinian parliament member from Gaza, your district is exclusively, in all likelihood, exclusively Palestinian, because there are no Israelis living in Gaza. You'll have to decide what is your district. Just in your head, decide that.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
make that decision. So when you vote, you vote based on the benefit of the vote to your districts.
Each time she needs to decide how she vote.
Yeah,
Each
pretty
time.
soon. Yes, so we are going to vote now on the Constitution. So I'm going to be asking the Palestinian parliament members to vote on the Constitution. This is only the Palestinian parliament members. Do you support the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation Constitution? This is only the Palestinian parliament members. Please vote.
Hey, can I ask?
Sure.
Yeah, there's a benefit behind this constitution or for Palestinian. Yeah, because I'm a Palestinian living in Gaza, and I didn't see anything just returned to us, you know.
Well, you are now the president of the United States.
Yeah.
So what is your question?
When you say that there's equal right between Israel and Palestine, Israel and Palestinian, this I
I'm
cannot
sorry,
say this.
I just do not, okay. So let me publish the vote. I'm gonna end the vote, gonna share the results. 95% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes. I'm gonna relaunch the vote and ask the Israeli parliament members to vote on the Constitution. This is for the Israeli parliament members only. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and I'm going to share the results. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of the Constitution. Now I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to ask Mr. Levy to comment on this Constitution.
Thank you, Joseph. Let me just say 2-3 sentences as an introduction to our whole seminar. Namely, that I really want to congratulate you for one main principal thing, not only dealing with the issue, which is really becoming rare more and more, is in Israel for sure and also overseas, but also waking up from the illusion that the two-state solution is still available. I really salute to you for realizing, and I'm sorry to tell you that the majority of Israelis, majority maybe of Palestinians, and for sure, majority of Europeans and Americans who still care about what's going on here, still stick to this train that left the station, the train of the two-state solution. And I guess we all agree about it, but I had a need to say it because it shouldn't be taken for granted. Still, Europe and the United States and Israel and the PA are still continuing to speak about the two-state solution while knowing that it's not available anymore. Part of them knows the truth even more than this, that Israel never meant to go for the two-state solution. But it doesn't matter now. Right now, we are in a stage in which the two-state solution is off the table. I see more and more voices which speak about it with courage and say, forget about it. Anyone who speaks about the two-state solution today does it only to gain more time for the occupation, to base itself, to enforce itself, to arm itself, just for gaining time. You know, second remark that I would like to say, that after 53 years, ever since 67, we have to realize that the occupation is not temporary, was never meant to be temporary, and is here to stay. Because the bluff, the lie, the illusion, that the occupation is temporary, we have a solution, the two-state solution, it's on the shelf, we just have to look for the right possibility, there will be a partner, there will be the right timing, and we'll just take it down from the shelf and say, here we have the solution. No, this was never meant to be like this, and for sure it's not possible anymore by all means. So first of all, let me tell you how I appreciate your effort, which really put an end to this masquerade, because this masquerade is going on now for decades. The masquerade of the two-state solution, which should come to its end because we are wasting critical time. Now about your constitution. First of all, I have a conceptual correction, because you are talking about Israelis and Palestinians. And this is problematic, because among Israelis, there are 20% who are Palestinians as well. So your calculation is also wrong, if I may say so. Yes, there are 5 million Palestinians in the occupied territories, but there are also 2 million Palestinians, Israeli citizens, who are the very same Palestinians from the very same families, culture, heritage, religion, anything. You can't separate between them. They are one people, many times they are one family. So the real calculation is that between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean, there are around 30 to 40 million people, and today there are exactly half and half. Half are Palestinians, half are Jews. And the real term should be Jews and Palestinians, because Israelis we have from many origins, not only Jews. We have 2 million Palestinians, as I said. You can't label them as Israelis versus their brothers who are Palestinians. So here we have to make, it's not a big error, but it should be corrected. We are dealing with a confederation which will contain 2 peoples very, very equal in their size, 6.5 to 7 million each. And from here you get also the equality in the political power and representation. The discourse, and here I identify myself so much with your constitution, because the discourse should be, from now on my view, forget about settlements, forget about borders, forget about security. We have to focus now on one issue, equal rights. That's my idea. I'm trying to convince the few people that I can convince that this should be the only discourse right now, equal rights, one person, one vote. And your constitution meets this new discourse, namely speaking about democracy, nothing but this. It's much more simple than it seems, because the only question is if Israel will be an apartheid state or a democracy. There's no third way for Israel and Palestine, no third way. If Israel wants to continue to be a Jewish state with the occupied territories, it cannot be a democracy. If Israel wants to become a democracy, it should give equal rights to anyone who lives between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean. So we are dealing with 14 million, 15 million people. My last remark is, I think it is with content, but again, it's not a major issue, but you spoke somewhere about forgetting the past or erasing the past. For many years, I was very much in favor of really putting an end to all the discussion about 48, about the Nakba, about everything we went through, the Holocaust, obviously. But you can't do it. You can't do it. Because in many ways, the past is the present, and it might be also the future. Because Israel never changed its policy toward the Palestinians ever since the Nakba, ever since 48. It's the very same policy with the very same guidelines, with the very same attitude toward the Palestinians. Look at 48 and look at 2021, and by the end of the day, you see the same, exactly the same. Go to the occupied territories, look at the new settlement of Eviatar. What's the difference between stealing land in 2021 or taking it by force or taking it with all kinds of means? What's the difference between 2021 and 48? So you can't just ignore the past. I could have ignored it if I would have known that there is something from the past which came to its end, and now we open a new chapter, and obviously let's not go back to all those very painful questions and sensitive questions from the past, but they were never solved. They are still with us. So any constitution which will try to erase or to put a line, to draw a line and say, we start now a new reality and the past is not relevant anymore, will not work and will be very not just. And my last, very last remark, you, Joseph, Mr. Vistar, spoke about reaching peace. And I think the goal of your constitution, of any kind of solution, should not be reaching peace. It should focus on reaching some kind of justice. Peace will be maybe as a benefit, as some kind of bonus. But first, we have to reach some kind of justice for both peoples. And I think this should be the goal. I think that after reaching some kind of justice, it will never be a total justice. But if we reach some kind of justice, then talking about peace will be much easier. But the goal must be justice, not peace. Thank you very much.
Mr. Levy, I think there are two things that you overlooked. The Constitution doesn't speak at all about who is Israeli and who is Palestinian. You can vote as Israeli, you can vote for Palestinian, or as Palestinian, you can vote for Israeli. That's one thing. So it's a separate government. The real question is, from what I hear you speak, is that you are in favor of a one state, one government, one person, one vote. And that would be the perfect theoretical solution, except that you'll need to explain how are you going to dismantle the Israeli government, the Palestinian government, or the Hamas government. If you're not able to explain that, then you'll have to consider what we are proposing, which is a common government that will work independent of the Israeli and the Palestinian and the Hamas government.
For this, you have to dismantle also the gap between Hamas and the PA. That's also an issue which right now cannot be overbridged.
Right.
So, look,
so how do you propose to dismantle the Israeli government, the Hamas government, and the Palestinian government?
Look, we are dealing, I guess we agree that anything that we are discussing here tonight will not be implemented within weeks or months or maybe even a few years. We try to find some goal, some vision, and then to see how we implement it. Therefore, I would love your idea if I will be really convinced that it's more realistic than the idea of one state. Then I will really, but I think the difficulties for both ideas are the same. And right now, both look unthinkable. But I must remind you that in South Africa in the late 80s, one person, one voice was also unthinkable. Nobody believed that this is going to happen, and within such short time, relatively. And it happened. And it was unthinkable. Believe me, it was unthinkable. So I think that our goal is to put guidelines and to try to create a new discourse. And then if it will be a confederation or a one state, finally they go hand to hand, because the main principle is of doing something together. It breaks the Israeli paradigm that the only solution is by separation. Separation is not possible anymore.
Right.
Not possible.
I agree.
No, not possible. You spoke about Tel Aviv and Gaza, but except of Tel Aviv and Gaza, any other region in your confederation will be mixed. Nablus will be mixed because it's surrounded by thousands and tens of thousands of settlers, and Beersheba will be mixed because it's surrounded by tens of thousands of Bedouins. We can't separate them anymore. They are one inside the other physically, And it's very hard to make this separation. For sure, you can't do it in the West Bank facing 700,000 Jewish settlers. They will never leave. So I think that by the end of the day, we should try to find a solution which will be like a guideline for the long term, which will try to bring up new discourses and new terms and new thoughts. And what will be implemented, because your idea and my idea are right now, for many Israelis and maybe Palestinians, it will sound like surreal, not less than surreal. And people will say, your idea is surreal, my idea is surreal, it will never happen, it's unthinkable. We should ignore those remarks and try to think what will bring us as close as possible to any kind of justice.
Okay, let's go to the next issue, and that's the declaration of intent to grant a veto power. The Confederation is the government of the entire population of Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. We hereby bestow a veto power relating to legislation affecting sovereignty to the following: the government of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. Does anyone have any question regarding this declaration? Okay, I hear no questions. I'm going to go to the vote.
Can I say something as the Palestinian Authority president?
Sure.
The Palestinian Authority president, by theory, is elected by the Palestinian people. So in the government of Israel is being represented in this confederation. So my question to you is, if Palestinians can be represented by two different entities, why, Israel is not being represented by Likud, by blue, white, different parties. So I know this was something that was discussed in the past, but I find it upsetting on the Palestinian part that we have two different entities. We are the Palestinian Authority, the government of the Palestinian people. Hamas should be part of that authority. I just find it kind of upsetting, and that this is treated as a separate government authority, like they're an equal, and they should be part of the Palestinian Authority.
Okay, I think we spoke about that. Our purpose is not to resolve the difficulties between the PA and Hamas. Our purpose is to make peace. And we make peace based on what we think have the sovereignty, not based on your internal conflict. And the Confederation is not represented by the Israeli government or the Palestinian government or the Hamas government. It's a separate entity. So let me take a vote on this and ask the.
Can I ask a question, Joe?
Yes.
Can you expand a little bit what you mean by the word sovereignty?
Yes, that's a very good question. If we need your help to implement the legislation, then it violates your sovereignty, and we're giving you a veto power over it. If we don't need your help and we can do it by ourselves, then it doesn't violate your sovereignty, and we don't care about your veto power. So let's take a vote on this.
Can I make sure I understand? So that means that Hamas and the PA and the Israeli government have a veto power if they have to be involved in implementing the legislation. But if they don't have to be involved, they have no veto power.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, so we are now the parliament of the Confederation. We are a parliament. We are a separate parliament, Israelis and Palestinians. And we are now deciding, do we give a veto power or not? So let me ask our Palestinian parliament members, do you support the declaration to intend to grant a veto power? Okay, I'm going to end the polling. And this is veto power to all three entities. And I'm going to share the results 81% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of granting a veto power. I'm going to stop sharing the result and I'm going to relaunch the vote and ask the Israeli parliament members, do you support the declaration of intent to grant the veto power? Okay, I'm going to end the polling and going to share the results. 80% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of granting a veto power to the government of Israel, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas. Now I'm going to go to Mr. Levy and ask for your comments regarding what we just passed. We are a separate government for the people of Israel and Palestine, and we agreed to pass legislation, and we agreed to give the Hamas leader, the Palestinian Authority, and the Israeli government a veto power over legislation we pass that violates their sovereignty. Mr. Levy, could you comment on that?
Sure. That's a very, very dangerous path that you are going, because putting a veto can paralyze the whole thing. What do you do after the veto? How do you go on after the veto? And there will be one veto after the other, because the chances that there will be agreement for sure in the beginning, when you are still in a stage of confidence building, the chance that there will be some kind of faith and trust after all those years is zero. And the three governments will do anything possible, at least in the beginning, to sabotage the other two governments. Even, by the way, Hamas and Fatah, obviously. The government of Hamas and government of Fatah, they do anything possible to paralyze any kind of change, reform, legislation. So I see it as a very, I understand the motivation for having veto, because this can relax those who are so afraid of losing their own sovereignty. But by the end of the day, this can be the main ticking bomb which can destroy the whole building.
So you need to keep in mind that 5 million people voted in this election, and we have 300 parliament members. And you asked a very good question. You said, well, they'll veto everything. So let's go to some legislation and see if they are able to veto it. Declaration of peace. Okay, here they don't have a veto, so I'm going to go to the next one. Teaching tolerance and understanding. This is a legislation that we are giving the Israeli, the Hamas, and the Palestinian Authority the power to veto. Let me read it to you. Both educational systems to teach tolerance in their public schools. Devote a certain number of hours for both sides to teach the history of the Israelis and the Palestinians, as well as teaching Arabic and Hebrew. Educators to draft textbooks together and arrange for a regular exchange of teachers. Public media on both sides to provide fair and equal coverage daily for teaching tolerance. The Israeli-Palestinian Confederation will be the facilitator to ensure that both sides are fairly represented. Does anyone have any question regarding the text of this proposed legislation? And then we're going to take a vote, and then we'll have Mr. Levy, and then we'll see if they veto it. Does anyone have any questions regarding the text of this legislation? Okay, I hear no questions. We're going to take a vote. I'm going to ask the Palestinian parliament members. Do you support teaching tolerance and understanding this legislation? We need 55% of the Palestinian parliament members to vote on this legislation. I'm going to end the polling, and I'm going to share the results. 88% of the Palestinian parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. I'm going to ask now the Israeli parliament members. Do you support teaching tolerance and understanding? You need to vote on that. Israeli parliament members only. I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to share the results. 100% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of this legislation. So I'm going to stop sharing the results, and I'm going to ask the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I think it's a very good, positive legislation for a good future. So I'm not going to veto it.
Okay. I'm going to ask the Hamas leader, Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation?
Hamas is going to accept this legislation because of the ambiguity in the statements. Statement 2 says that each side has to teach the history of Israelis and Palestinians. And our view of the history, I do believe, is different than other people's view of the history. And as long as that's not specified, what constitutes the history, we're happy with that.
Well, that's a technical argument. We are going to have committees made out of Israelis and Palestinians, educators, to draft textbooks, and we're going to use the international community. But if the textbooks are to your satisfaction, are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I'll accept it.
Okay, let's go to the PA Parliament President. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I will accept this legislation. We will not
Okay.
veto it.
Okay, so this legislation passed by the majority of the Israeli and the Palestinian parliament members. It was not vetoed by the Israeli, Hamas, or the PA. So let's go to Mr. Levy and have his comments regarding this legislation.
I really don't want to be this guy who always spoils any party. And I'm here really not, and I'm here really not for this purpose. As I said in my introduction, I really highly appreciate your efforts, and not only your efforts, also your direction. But let's take an issue like the history, the Jewish history and the Palestinian history, which will be taught in both sides, or in all the three sides in the Confederation. I don't see today, at least, an Israeli and the Palestinian agree what is the Israeli-Palestinian, is the Israeli history or the Palestinian history. You don't have something like the Israeli history as, you know, as a scientific matter of fact, and the Palestinian history as a scientific matter of fact. We are dealing with opposing narratives which can't meet right now. When the Palestinians will teach their history, they will teach their pupils that Israel was a colonialistic force who came to the Middle East and then expelled 700,000 Palestinians and never let them go back. And when the Jews will tell their own history or teach their own history, it will be about the Holocaust and about the need to find a place, a homeland for the Jewish people. This will never meet one with the other. So you can't teach them both, because finally you have to tell your pupil, will it be Palestinian or Israeli? What is the truth? He will ask you, what is the truth? Is it about colonialism or is it about Zionism? Is it about justice to the survivors of the Holocaust, or is it about justice to the Palestinian diaspora who lives until this very day in refugee camps. How will you overbridge this? It's not like teach you two separate narratives. Finally, you have also to tell your students some direction, to give them some direction to overbridge those two narratives. And those narratives right now are very far off being able to find some kind of meeting points. There are no meeting points.
Well, the proposal.
And as a Hamas leader, I'll add to what Gideon Levy said, that besides colonialism and Zionism, Hamas has a very strong religious belief. And that would be part of the history that we would see, that we as Hamas would see and insist on.
Well, the legislation specifically says that both sides, that the history as presented by both sides will be taught, not that there will be a decision which is the right history. But let me go to the next legislation, because I think we have to be a little bit more constructive and go to issues that are, so I'm going to share the screen again. I'm going to go to the next legislation, and that is a joint economic zone. So a joint economic zone between Israel and Gaza that will be exclusively under the Israeli-Palestinian Confederation control, with a common community economy, education and industry and agriculture will be involved in that joint economic zone. International airport and a seaport, equally accessible to the Israelis and the Palestinians. Does anyone have any questions regarding this legislation? Okay, I hear no questions. I'm going to take a vote. Palestinian parliament members, please vote. Do you support a joint economic zone? I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to share the results. 73% of the Palestinian parliament members voted yes in favor of this legislation. Let's go to the Israeli parliament members. Do you support a joint economic zone? Okay, I'm going to end the polling. I'm going to share the results. 75% of the Israeli parliament members voted in favor of the joint economic zone. Let me go to the Hamas leader. Mr. Hamas leader, are you going to veto this legislation? Mr. Hamas leader.
Yeah. As Hamas leader, it's a little.
Are you going to veto this legislation?
It's a little. As Hamas leader, I'm hesitant on this legislation.
I can't hear you.
As Hamas leader, do you hear me now?
Yeah, I hear you now.
Okay, as Hamas leader, I'm hesitant because joint economic zones are installed to make it easier for business to take advantage of people and workers and the environment. And as Hamas leader, I have a worry that the joint economic zone would be good for a few people, mostly rich people from Israel, and will be basically taking advantage of my citizens in Hamas, my poor citizens in Hamas.
Mr. Hamas leader, you have 50% unemployment in Gaza. This could completely eviscerate the unemployment in Gaza. You have 60 parliament members from Gaza in the Confederation. 75% voted yes. Are you going to take all of that into consideration?
It's bothersome that the regulations to protect the people, besides having unemployment, we don't want these people to be persecuted to death.
Okay, so you are hesitant.
Yes.
Okay, let's go to the Israeli Prime Minister. Are you going to veto this legislation?
I'm not going to veto that, but let me just make one quick comment to what GIDEON Levy said before. You cannot invent history. That's regarding the previous legislation. The history that will be presented for the teaching purposes, the books that will be written will include only facts. You cannot invent historical facts. You're going to present the true facts of the Jewish history and the true facts of the Palestinian history. That's how you're going to achieve awareness among the newer generation for tolerance and so on. So,
okay.
That's what we need to do. True facts.
Let me go to the Palestinian Authority president. Are you going to veto this legislation?
No, I'm not going to veto this legislation. And I think that it will bring a more equal ground when it comes to economy and the improving of the economic conditions. Even though my Hamas counterpart is saying that it may open to exploitation, but on the other hand, if you see, it says we have equal access to these ports. So this means that Palestinian companies will be able to compete against Israeli companies. This is fundamentally what we want, and especially in Gaza, that is suffering from a blockade, that businesses and people in Gaza will be able to compete in an open economy to improve their lives. This is basically exactly what we need in Gaza for our people.
Okay, so we gave veto power to all three governments on this legislation. No one vetoed this legislation. This legislation is now passed. It's the law of the land. We're going to build the joint economic zone. We've been going now for over an hour. Let's have some concluding remarks for Mr. Levy, and then we'll open. So if you can make your concluding remarks very short, and then we'll open up for the participant to ask you questions.
Thank you.
Mr.
First
Levy,
of all,
are you with- Yeah.
yes, sure. First of all, I would like just to refer to the last vote and to say that we have joint economical zones. We had them in the past also in Gaza. We have them still in the West Bank. And I just want to remind all of us that those joint economical zones are very, very one-sided. The owners are always Jews, the workers are Palestinians. We cannot accept it in a confederation. And yes, there is a terrible unemployment rate in Gaza, and Gaza is poor, and so is the West Bank. And people would do anything possible to get some kind of job for any kind of price, any kind of salary, any kind of income. But this, in a just system, cannot be taken for granted and cannot be a challenge in the way that finally it will keep the same gap, because there is a gap between the Jewish society and the Palestinian society. Let's face it, let's be honest, there is a huge gap. First world, third world, maybe second world, third world. We have to do something to bring it to an equal place, because economy has a very important role. And if it will just freeze the present status quo in which Jews are richer, are more educated, technology, army, everything is more advanced, so we did nothing. So therefore, when we create those joint economical zones, which sound fantastic and is a great idea, we have to take some measures to try to improve the equality. I don't think we'll get into equality at once, but there must be some kind of regulations which will enable more equality than it is if you just let it go, according to the market's laws, If you go only according to economy, you will get again this colonialistic approach of rich Jews employing poor Palestinians. We don't want it. Now, I think it's a great beginning what you are doing. I hope it will have a continuous. I think we saw it here tonight that it's a good beginning, but it is just a beginning. We face endless difficulties and mines and barriers on this long way. As long as we realize it is a long way, as long as we don't have any illusions that this can be achieved within weeks in a peace conference in Camp David, then it is the beginning of a very long march, but a very good beginning. And I congratulate you for this. I wish Israelis would have taken so much time and energy and imagination to deal with those issues, because the problem with Israel is that nobody cares and nobody has the knowledge and nobody wants to know what's going on half an hour away from our homes.
Could we open up for the participant to ask a question, Mr. Levy? Could you raise your hand if you have a question? You can go to the participant and raise your hand. Okay, let's start with Margot. Margot, can you ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. My question is that given that the Israeli Declaration of Independence says it will establish, they will support the United Nations proposal in 1947 for an economic union, would an economic union with freedom of residence and travel for all the residents of Israel within the Green Line, including, of course, the Palestinians of 1948, the Palestinian citizens of Israel, and the people of Gaza and the West Bank, is that one way of addressing both the economic issues and the issues of refugees? Because at least refugees who are already within the West Bank and Gaza would be able to return to their ancestral communities within the Green Line. I think if you had an economic union of the whole country, would that be a good proposal? Because it's mentioned in the Israeli Declaration of Independence.
So what is your question, Margot?
Yes, I'm asking about the idea of an economic union of the entire area along the lines of the European Union with freedom of residence and travel for all the citizens of Gaza and the West Bank and Israel within the Green Line.
Are you asking Mr. Levy that question?
Yes, or anyone else that's appropriate. I'm asking specifically to Gideon Levy.
Thank you, Margot. I think it's a very good question, but I would elaborate on this. I would extend it, because it's not only freedom of movement between all the areas of the Confederation, it's also the question, the major principal question of immigration. I mean, what will be the immigration policy?
Mm-hmm.
Will it be equal? Jews and Palestinians will have the very same right to immigrate to this confederation?
Mm-hmm.
I think
Yes.
Here we are facing maybe one of the core issues, and you can't ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, you need freedom of movement, otherwise you don't have an economy. And the fact that Gaza is starving is mainly because Gaza doesn't have freedom of movement, neither for goods nor for people.
Mm-hmm.
But this is not enough. What about immigration? Only Jews will be allowed to immigrate to this confederation like
That's
it was until now? If this is the case, forget about justice. If you forget about justice, forget about peace. If you open it up to a controlled immigration policy, and I'm not speaking now about everyone can come tomorrow. This is really crazy and is not realistic. But if you agree on an equal immigration policy,
Yes.
with some guidelines and some regulations, without this, you don't have an equal economy. Again, if a high-tech expert from Los Angeles, who is from Palestinian region, will want to come to his homeland, to this confederation, and he will be blocked like he is today. And only an Ethiopian Jew from Ethiopia will be allowed to come to this confederation. We did nothing.
That's right.
George?
Yes, thank you, Joseph. Let me first quickly introduce myself. I'm a co-administrator of the Facebook group. It's called Peace Through Justice for All in Palestine, Israel. And I would like to ask Gideon Levy the following question. I mean, he has been very clear that in his view, the two-state solution is dead. And I understand the arguments because of the approximately 700,000 settlers in the West Bank. I fully support the long-term idea and goal of one state with equal rights for all. However, there might be an intermediate solution that in the long term would lead to such a solution. That would be a confederacy, not of peoples, but of two states. Now, of course, as you said, you cannot separate the Israelis, all these hundreds and thousands of Israelis and Palestinians anymore. So the idea of the two-state confederacy would be to allow these settlers to stay as legalized foreign residents in Palestine. And by the same token, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees and their descendants could then return to Israel as legalized foreign residents, permanent residents.
What is your question, George?
Feasible. This might be more feasible.
George, what is your question? Because it sounds like
I would like to just to hear Gideon Levy's opinion about this.
Yes, George, I totally agree with you. This is a key issue, and I believe that we will never solve the problem without such an attitude like yours, which is an attitude based on equality. Because by the end of the day, I think that maybe the major problem, which doesn't enable us to get to any progress, is lack of equality. And the Confederation might be the right step. And I totally agree with you that maybe Confederation will be an interim phase toward a one state one day. Maybe we have to go through a confederation on the way to this long-term vision of one democracy. Maybe it is the best solution. But even in the stage of the confederation, equality must be in any issue that we face.
Absolutely.
Any issue must be based on equality, and equality is maybe the value which we all miss more than anything else, because today there is no equality between Israelis and Palestinians almost in any field. You name it, and you will not find equality. The Confederation must base itself on keeping equality in any field of life.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Joseph, I'd like to add something, if I may, please.
Sure, but let me ask Mr. Levy, I want to ask him about the facts and assumptions. I want to ask Mr. Levy, I presented certain assumptions in this. The assumption is that 14 million people will vote, that it will be an election, regardless of the Israeli or the Palestinian governments, that there will be an election, that 5 million people will vote, and 300 parliament members will be elected. Do you have any belief that these assumptions cannot become reality?
No, they can become reality. They definitely can become reality.
Yeah,
definitely.
Thank you. Amnon, you have a question?
Yes. with regard to one-state solution, there would be a lot of demographic changes that might destroy the identity of Israel as we know it today, the Jewish state and so forth. So that may bring a lot of resistance by many participants. Imagine 700,000 so-called refugees immigrate to Israel, and all of a sudden you have majority, the Jews will have minority, and the other way around with the Palestinians. So that may not work. However, what I'd like to ask Gideon, please, first of all, my name is Amnon. I live in Los Angeles, and I would like to ask you, in light of the fact that you seem to favor the idea of this particular federation, what can you do using your stature, using your influence in Israel? What can you do, if any, to promote the idea of the Israeli-Palestinian Federation in Israel, so that we can get this thing rolling and get the idea become reality? Because you seem to favor this thing. So can you tell us what can you do on your part from Israel?
You see, Amnon, those are very, as you know, I guess, those are very bad times in Israel. Yes. Not because Israel went only to the right pole more and more into the nationalistic pole. This is by itself a problem. Israel is today more nationalistic than ever before, but that's not the main problem. I see the main problem in the total denial that most of Israelis live in. I think the Israeli society today is maybe the number one in the world in living in denial with the major problems that it is facing. It's unbelievable. We had now 4 elections campaign. Nobody speaks about those issues that we are speaking here tonight. Nobody. This is a non-issue. Israel is living in total denial. People have no interest whatsoever. My newspaper, Haaretz, is the only one which still try to keep those issues alive with very little success, I must say, because by the end of the day, people are totally blind, ignorant. Ask a 18 or 20-year-old Israeli about the West Bank, about Palestine, about Nakba. He would know nothing, but really nothing, and he will care nothing about it. And on the other hand, what he will know will be a product of an ongoing brainwash system, namely all the Palestinians are terrorists. All the Palestinians wake up in the morning and the first thing they are thinking about is how many Jews will they kill today and what will they do to push the Israelis into the sea, into the ocean. So in this framework, to speak about what can I do to influence, I, in the last 2 or 3 years, write not only, but I'm writing as much as I can, first of all, to put an end to the lies, A, that the occupation is temporary, B, the solution is still available. As much as I do it, there are changes. I must say more and more Israelis realize that the two-state solution is not available. Even the term apartheid, which 5 years ago was almost illegal, for sure not illegitimate to use, is being used in Israeli discourse more and more, I must say. At least in my newspaper, but not only in my newspaper. Also, I mean, the fact that maybe Israel is an apartheid state is not anymore something that people fall from the chair, as we say in Hebrew, when they hear it. But by the end of the day, it's almost an impossible mission. And here comes my conclusion. At least it is my private conclusion. Change will not come from within Israel. Change must come from the international community. Israelis are so disconnected to reality and brainwashed that it's really not realistic to think that one morning the Israelis will wake up, or part of the Israelis, and say, oh, this situation is not very nice. Let's put an end to it. Let's go for confederation or federation, one state or two state, whatever. No, they don't deal with it at all. The international community and mainly civil societies must force Israel to confront those issues. And this can be done, unfortunately, only with pressure. It will not happen without pressure from the outside.
Gideon, I agree with what you're saying regarding the chaos and instability that are currently existing in Israel. We're fully aware of it. But my question was, you, with your writings and influence in Israel, is there anything that you could do something in terms of making Israelis aware of this idea of the Israeli-Palestinian Federation? Now, you said earlier it's impossible and so on. My philosophy is that there's nothing in the world that it's impossible if you have the will to do that. So what can you do, given the fact that you like the idea of the IPC? What can you do on your part?
Look, I write 3 times a week in Haaretz. I appear quite a lot recently in Israeli TV. I try to raise my voice as much as I can. I don't speak specifically about the IPC because I think first we have to make Israelis realize that the two-state solution is finished. I think this is the first stage. Before you build a new building, you have to demolish the old one. Otherwise, you don't have a ground to build a new building. And once Israelis will realize that the two-state solution is not possible anymore, then we will be able to build a new dream, a new vision, a new plan. We are not there, we are far off being there. But above all, Amnon, the main challenge is now to make them have any kind of interest in those issues. Those issues are not interesting most of the Israelis. They are in a different place. And I guess you know it.
Okay, we have Libby and then Claire.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you, I've been involved in Jewish-Palestinian dialogue for 30 years. And I've found that relationship building is done by sharing our personal narratives. And I'm aware that over the years, the grassroots activities in Israel, Palestine have been growing. There's ALMEP, Alliance for Middle East Peace. You're probably aware of the Combatants for Peace, the bereaved parents. And I'm wondering what you feel, what role they can play in bringing about this new way of thinking, cooperating and working together. And also if there's a way you can highlight their stories, their activities in your papers so that the grassroots activity is getting more attention and more favor to show that people really want to cooperate, live together, share life together, and that to keep people apart because the governments fear they're building relationships. And so they make it illegal to come together and very difficult. How can this be changed so that people can get to know each other, share their stories, and build relationships?
I think you mentioned some of the organization, and there are so many others, really devoted people, young and old, Palestinians and Jews, who are ready really to sacrifice a lot. But by the end of the day, not only they are a very marginal minority, I'm afraid to say, but they are totally delegitimized by the government and unfortunately also by the majority, the vast majority of Israeli media. I'll give you one example which maybe will explain you or demonstrate you the whole problem. We have this organization of Breaking the Silence. Breaking the Silence is an NGO established by soldiers who wanted to tell the Israelis what they were doing throughout their military service in the occupied territories. And we always thought that once the soldiers will speak up, then the Israelis will start to open their mind and hearts and ears to listen to them, because this is not me who tells all kinds of lies as they think. Those are the soldiers, the friends of our sons and the sons of our friends. And breaking the silence in many ways was failing in delivering the message, because the whole military and security establishment, with the collaboration of most of Israeli media, really delegitimized them. And their voice is hardly heard, and if it is heard, it's not accepted as a reliable voice. Same for many organizational work for really common living. You mentioned Combat for Peace. There are some others who do amazing jobs, really. People who go and help shepherds in southern Hebron to get to their fields, or children to get to the schools, protect them from the settlements, from the settlers. So many Mahsom Watch, women who are going to all the checkpoints and document what's going on in the checkpoints. Those are fantastic initiatives, but unfortunately, it is a very small drop in the ocean.
Claire? You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So I wanted to turn it round, Gideon, a little bit and say, what do you think that we can do in the diaspora to put pressure on the Israeli government? I think one of the things that has to happen is that it can no longer be a Jewish state. And, you know, like one of the things we're doing is supporting BDS, for example, intellectual BDS. I don't know what else. I wonder what your ideas are about that. What can we do in the diaspora? I'm in the UK.
Unfortunately, you can do more than we can do in Israel. And it is really unfortunate, but that's the truth. And I see also more hope in what you are doing in the UK, in the United States, in Europe, and in other places. I think that as long as Israel will not, the Israelis will not pay for the crimes and not be taken accountable for the crimes on a personal and collective ground, nothing will change. Why would it change? What incentive have the Israelis today to change their way of thinking? What incentive? Life in Israel is really quite good. And Israelis in all the polls seem to be so happy and so satisfied and so proud about the morality of their army and morality of their country, that it's very hard to break it, to stand against it. While civil societies in the world can really lead to a change. And we see it in a very clear way in the United States. You know, today the left wing of the Democratic Party in the United States is more progressive than most of Europe. This was never the case. Europe was always more progressive than the United States. Now it's the opposite. The hope is there in the campuses, in the Democratic Party, in its left wing, obviously, and also in Europe. Look, imagine yourself that Jeremy Corbyn would have been elected for Prime Minister in your country, the UK. I think there would be a new international discourse toward Israel. The problem is, and that's a major problem and a major obstacle, that Israel succeeded in the last years with its new strategy, and it is a new strategy, to label any criticism about Israel as anti-Semitism. And it did paralyze Europe. Journalists don't dare to criticize Israel because they are afraid to be labeled as anti-Semites. Thinkers, politicians, everyone is afraid to speak out. You can't find today a venue. I was in Germany 1 or 2 years ago with innocent meeting of solidarity movement with the Palestinians. They couldn't find a venue in Berlin. We had to go 200 kilometers to a Copt monastery where the Egyptian old monk was ready to host us. Israel succeeded to paralyze Europe. But still, I think there are enough forces in the civil society, and mainly the civil society, not the governments. Today, there is no government in Europe, for sure, who will be ready to go against Israel. No way. But there are civil societies who are very promising. I'm afraid to tell you, Claire, that by the end of the day, it's about you to fulfill the responsibility of the international community.
Gideon, you seem to think that the world.
Wait, Amnon, that's not fair.
Can I just come back on that just a bit? I just want to say that's breaking down in the UK, actually, that fear. And people are less frightened and standing up to it. And people are now talking more about the Palestinians, maybe in little pockets, but that is happening. And my other thought is it can't be good for the Israelis to be in that state of denial. It just can't be good for people. And I imagine that behind that state of denial is a lot of fear about how powerful the Palestinians and the world could be in Israel if the world really wants change. And I don't know what to do with that. I think, you know, there's something about how can we make it okay when it's not.
Joseph,
let's go to...
my comment is very apropos. I'll make it very quickly. Gideon, you seem to think that the world needs to put pressure on Israel. Do you also think that the world needs to put pressure on Hamas to change their charter that right now calls for the destruction of the state of Israel and killing all the Jews? This is their charter. Do you think Hamas also needs to feel some pressure from the world to change their idea about Israel and start recognizing Israel? What do you think? You cannot put pressure on one side and not on the other side, especially when the other side is promoting killing you.
With all due respect, there is no symmetry, Amnon. There's the occupier and the occupied, and you can't compare between them. Sure, Hamas is not my cup of tea. Sure, Hamas plays a very negative role and destructive role and illegitimate role. But by the end of the day, you can't compare Hamas to Israel, with all due respect. Israel is the darling of the West. Hamas is not. Nobody talks to Hamas, except of Iran and maybe Syria. Israel is the darling of the West, as you know. Israel is perceived as the only democracy in the Middle East. Nobody speaks about democracy in Hamas. Don't get into this trap of making it a symmetry. Both sides need to do same things. Pressure must be put on both. No. After 53 years of occupation, the pressure should be first of all on the occupier and not equally on Hamas. By all means not.
You cannot occupy something.
I'm not, this is not fair. We have other people that are waiting to ask questions. Let's go to Avi. Avi, can you?
Yes, I'm muted. My question to Gideon Levy. When I'm reading the Haaretz, I'm reading your articles. I don't know, I'm vegetarian and nothing changed the world that they will be keep eating meat. My question, you're looking for justice. And my question is, when you're talking about justice, and of course, I'm with the same opinion with you. I just don't think that it's realistic. When you're talking about justice, do you mean the justice that look at the past or a justice for the future? Because looking for justice for the past, which means right of return, you will never find, it doesn't matter how much pressure there will be on Israel, it won't take place. And I don't think that you are, I think we are both realistic about it. So when you're talking about justice, how you frame it? What do you think could be a justice? And I'm the same opinion with you that two states, it's a nice illusion for the year 2000, but not anymore for 2021.
We totally agree, Avi. First of all,